So, welcome everybody to Synchronistic World Global Activation Party. And today I have with me a amazing friend and entrepreneur, Mads Singers. He has more than 10 years of experience in Fortune 500 companies such as Xerox, IBM, and more than 7 years of experience in coaching and consulting online entrepreneurs. He speaks at many large events such as CM, SEO, TIECon, DCBKK, DMS, Bali, SEO Spring Training, and Survive and Thrive e-commerce summit. He's working on 4 companies right now, managing more than 130 people. And he doesn't just talk the talk, he walks the walk. As a management expert, Mads is also an expert on growing and scaling online businesses. He's one of the industry experts in DISC methodology, which is the cornerstone of his management philosophy. He shares his knowledge through Effective Management Mastery course and community, and I'm really, really excited to bring him to you. He runs a $500,000 to $1 million business, and at the bottom of it all, Mads is such an amazing systems thinker, clear thinker, but also at the same time has a really amazing personality that is easy to connect with. So with great honor, joy, and excitement, I bring to you Mads Singers.
Hello, hello, hello. Awesome to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. He's literally right now in the middle of running his own summit that he pivoted to immediately, like as the corona thing started spreading and everything had to go online. So it's amazing to be able to see someone who's just not only so quick in pivoting, but also doing so many amazing things. So tell us a little bit more about you and how you went from corporate to now running 4 businesses, and then how you manage to just scale managing 130 people. What is that like?
Yeah, that's a while since I've updated. We're probably 150 or 160 now, but yeah, that's cool. And yeah, so basically, I mean, my background was originally corporate. I used to work in like various management roles and so on, and I always had a lot of fun with that. I always really loved working with people, and different from most people, I never hated my day job. Like, so I didn't leave the corporate world and I wasn't like, oh, I hate this thing. I need to do something else, right? Like for me, I love doing what I was doing. I'm a big believer in the fact that happiness is a choice, and I generally choose to be happy with what I do. But yeah, it was very enjoyable. But I basically felt that I could influence more people by running my own show. So around 2013 or so, 2012 actually, I started coaching people while I was working corporately. So I was coaching like other managers and other large businesses and some entrepreneurs and so on, and basically coaching on people management. Because reality is, in most businesses, when you get promoted to a people management role, there is no support. There's no training. You have a boss that's like, hey, if you have any questions, my door's open. And that's typically how it works, right? So it's one of the downfalls for most, in my opinion, most organizations, big as small. And yeah, I saw a huge gap in the market, and I love working with entrepreneurs the most. So small business owners with 5, 10, 20, 50, 100 staff, just because you see the impact instantly, right? Like I've worked with clients, that was stuck at 40 people for a couple of years. I come in, work with them, and literally 3 months later, they have 100 staff and they're growing like exponentially. And a lot of the time, the whole thing is that people are held back often because of lack of management skills, right? Particularly when it comes to growth. Like some people get stuck at sort of 5 to 8 people, some get stuck around 20, some it's around 50, but most people get stuck at some level where the management skills basically don't. I mean, they get stuck because they're sort of their mindset around managing people and managing a business kind of gets stuck, right? Because they get to the end of where the mindset stops. And particularly the case for people who start out as freelancers, and they're hiring others that are doing the same as them, and they grow a small business, but they very rarely get above these 5, 6, 10 people or whatever, right? So that's basically people that I work with for a long time. Then about Yeah, then I left the corporate world in early 2014, and then basically since then I've done management coaching consistently. Now I've always insisted to do that as a part of what I do, so I never spend more generally than about 10 hours a week on coaching, and that comes from the fact that I've had a lot of coaches throughout my career, and the one thing that I love is when people actually do the thing they coach. So even though I'm sitting on a chair and not walking the walk right this second, I really believe that if you're coaching people in something, you're better doing so if you actually
In
execute.
practice. Yeah.
So, yeah,
Absolutely. So you're speaking from experience and also constantly updating your experience. I really like the point that you mentioned that there's different stages in people management. There's obviously like that first stage to 5 to 8 people, and then there's like multiple stages past that. What are some of the stages that you're seeing? Like, first of all, like, does it matter? Is there a correlation between how big your team is and how much revenue you're bringing in?
Potentially. I mean, so one of the challenges, if you will, nowadays is there's business models that can make a ton of money with very little people. I mean, if you run a SaaS company or even something like a FBA business, like a team of one, two, three people can suddenly be making 1 million. Whereas if you're running more traditional product businesses, the like, you often need more people to match the revenue. Like the way I look at business in general is that it's some people always look at very high profit margin. Some people always look at, some people think it's all about people. The whole thing for me is it's not. All right. So when I look at business, I look at interesting ideas and interesting concepts that make sense where they are. So like my outsourcing company that I run, we have lots and lots of people, both in the Philippines and also native speakers that are basically doing outsourcing for lots of people. Now that's not a high profit margin business because you're basically fundamentally you're making a small profit on reselling labor. So there's a certain natural limit to what you're going to make from that, right? Whereas when I do coaching, I mean it's primarily profits, right? So
Got it. Yeah. And that makes sense. And I know that one of your passions is people management. And why do you like it so much? And how is it that one of the things that I find it quite tough for founders or even people who are really passionate about their business is letting go of control and finding the right things to actually pay attention to. And so as people are growing their businesses, how do you contextualize it and how do you help people prioritize their time because they can be caring about every single item of every single team member and that would drive them crazy. So what's your take on that?
yeah. So first things first, I think from a people management, the reason why I love it and the reason why it's a big thing for me is that I mean that's the whole reason why I went the sort of businessy route rather than the anything else route, right? So basically, when I was 18, I got an amazing manager. I got blown away. I was so impressed with how she made people feel and the impact she had on people's life and so on. Because my whole childhood, I've been told like, yeah, school is the best. Just wait till you get out in real life and have to get to work. And when you have a job, life will suck so much. And I never got to the point where life sucked, but I really loved the way she just made people feel and the way she was able to basically, you know, e- enable people to do amazing things and enjoy their job. So that's what I do, and that's what I want to do. Like I build companies. I love building teams of awesome people that can do things they've never done before, right? And my focus when I'm building a business is always more so putting the right team together to build it more than being the expert, right? I don't want to be the expert anymore. And I mean, it was probably the biggest challenge in my corporate management career when I was the expert, because the problem is, and that's the role that most entrepreneurs find themselves in. They're very, very good at what it is they do. And the reason why they struggle to delegate is typically because one, they don't understand how to actually run a business. Like they don't understand that, it's not just about them doing, and depending, like I spend a lot of time with various personalities, and different personalities kind of have different reasons why they don't like it. So some people, for example, when they're not doing the work, when they're not doing the delivery, they feel like they're not working. They feel incapacitated somehow, right? Um, for others, it's a question of perfectionism, and they're like, yeah, it has to be perfect. If we deliver, it's not perfect. My world is blowing up, and that's the only reason why customers use me, and all of that good stuff. But they all forget they started somewhere, right? Like they had their first customers, and when they had their first customers, they didn't do as well as when they had their 50th or their 100th because they had a lot more experience. And that, that's the whole thing when you're building and scaling, right? And I mean, delegation is probably the number one thing that I work with most people on, generally from a management standpoint, right? Because so many people really struggle with it. And to be honest, it's more mindset than anything else, right? So fundamentally, when you build a business, it's like a pyramid, right? In the beginning, it's a small pyramid with just one brick, and that's you. And fundamentally, the way you grow a business is consistently increasing the value of each brick. So, for example, if what you're doing right now makes you an average of $50 an hour or $100 an hour, then that's your value. Now, if your value is about $100 an hour and you're sitting doing things that someone getting paid $10 an hour, $20 an hour could do, you're fundamentally wasting company resources, right? And that mindset is critical for growth because what you need to do is you constantly need to evaluate everything you do. And you constantly need to be looking at, what are the options for this? Is there a service that could do it for me? Is there other people that could do it for me somehow? Do I need to hire staff in house? Like, what are the options for this to get done? Not by me, right? And so many things. Many entrepreneurs, for example, take bookkeeping. They understand that giving that to someone else makes sense. So many entrepreneurs have delegated bookkeeping. That's not a problem. But if they look at something similar, they suddenly can't let go, and they have to own it and all this good stuff. And it's the same thing, right? Fundamentally, it's the same thing. So again, depending on where you are in your business, you're more or less needed and you more or less need to be involved. But the fundamental of growing a business is getting yourself out of the delivery. And one of the areas where people, let's call it, screw up a bit is the whole business model. Like most smaller businesses don't have a great business model. It's kind of like oh, we do social media. And it's like, yeah, we do anything kind of social media kind of sort of thing. And the reason why the owner is needed is because there's very little framework around what they do. And therefore, it's extremely difficult to delegate because it's like this customer needs this customer needs that. And it's all like sort of custom solutions. And people have this idea that, oh, yeah, but I'm not making much money. So if I bring on this customer, I'll make more money. But the problem is that's not a business. That's a freelance mentality where you're basically building yourself a given, sometimes very well paid, more than full-time job, right? When you're building an actual business, you want to go in and you want to say, what's the process? And most successful businesses is built on one single executable process, right? So if we just take social media as an example, that could be, we do Pinterest for SEO companies, or we do Pinterest for coaches, or even narrower than that. And the thing is, as a service provider, you want to determine what you deliver. So again, the problem is way too many people. It's like, what do you want? What do you want? What are you looking for? But the thing is, for you to have a scalable process, a scalable business, you want to tell people what you provide. And sometimes that's not what people need, and that's okay. Then they're not the right customer. But if you say, we do Pinterest for coaches, we do 20 pins a day, this is the framework, this is the setup, this is how we do it, this is whatever, right? So you build that framework and you build that very executable process. When you go in and do that, suddenly delegating becomes a lot easier because the framework is the same every single time. And that is fundamentally where most smaller businesses struggle, right? So most business owners struggle with delegation. Most businesses in themselves struggle because the service and the deliverables they have, the owner feel they're required, but it's really because they haven't built a business, right? They're doing random services that require their expertise. So sometimes it's a web developer, and one day, they're building an e-commerce store, and the next day they're building a coaching website, and they're like, oh, but I can't delegate it because no one can do all this stuff like I do it. And that's correct, but you haven't got a business, right? That's not doing that is not a business, right?
I feel like we could talk about this for ages because a lot of people they keep jumping around their business models, and sometimes it takes that level of focus as well as a level of commitment and also risk because of the opportunity cost of like just shutting down all the other processes and being like, look, I'm going to double down on this particular process. Was it easy for you to do that for your, I mean, you have four businesses, but was it easy for you to focus on one framework, sort of like one model, one that, or did you also explore around a
So
little
it's been
bit,
a little
just out of
bit different with different
curiosity?
businesses. So the coaching was very straightforward. I mean, I've always been very clear on what I wanted to do. I'm very clear on the people I want to help, and that's been very straightforward. In terms of the outsourcing company, like most businesses, like if you have a web development company, what you want to do when you just start out is sometimes this, because you want to try and get 10, 15, 20 clients in various areas, and then sit down and look at, who's the best client we have. Why is that the best client? And, particularly if you've had a couple in the same kind of niche or with the same kind of requirement, and you're like, they're super easy to fulfill. They might not pay the most, but it's super easy to fulfill. It's super scalable. And then you're like, well, great. Let's niche down in that area. Let's deliver that one thing and let's drop the rest. Right. And you don't necessarily like, obviously, if you're making 10 grand a month and have a couple of staff, and you don't necessarily just want to drop everything with the flick of a finger, but you want to put yourself in a situation where when you bring new customers on board, they fit your framework, right? And then over time, like the old customers will eventually disappear, right? But that's the successful businesses you see, the business that scale really quickly, do just that, and they do it extremely well. So they find something they can do extremely well. They determine the framework, they determine the deliverables, and then they scale it out to lots of customers. The beautiful thing with that is also you get so many great case studies, because one of the problems that many people have is like, oh, well, do you have someone else like in my industry you have helped do this thing? And you're like, well, I know you're a hairdresser, but I help a carpenter. That's kind of the same, isn't it? Whereas when you focus on a very specific niche, a very specific deliverable, you often get a lot of great case studies that really help pinpoint and really help show your potential customers what you're capable of. And again, the second problem is that particularly with entrepreneurs, people have this tendency to like, oh, this customer wants something slightly different, let's do that. And again, sometimes when people are standing with a big pot of money, that can be tempting and so on. And sometimes you can't do it. But the fundamental, if you really want to grow and scale significantly, you only pick people who fit your framework.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Yeah, I definitely hear a lot of people always asking about, okay, how do I compromise some of these things just because of and that opportunity? But that framework is so important to stick to if you know it already works. So let's talk about wealth. What's your view on wealth? So our topic is on synchronistic wealth, a type of wealth that comes through to us that is not just in the form of money, but also in the form of opportunities, maybe even network, the value in your network and the value in, all of the connections and experiences that you have.
Right. Now, there's a couple of questions at the same time, I guess, but let's start from the top. So, uh, first, wealth means very different things to very different people. So, particularly when you're dealing with reserved people, for most very reserved people, wealth doesn't matter or money doesn't matter very much. And what happens is many reserved people, when they start building a business and all this kind of stuff, they often become the world's best procrastinators, and it is because they try and motivate themselves with a money goal. And the problem is, in most cases, money doesn't motivate them. So they have this idea from society around that you should make a lot of money and all this kind of stuff. But the problem is the second they have enough money to eat comfortably, live comfortably, and be relatively comfortable, their motivation with money stops. No matter, and some coaches like, oh, you just have to set a goal and then go for it. And the whole problem is that money doesn't motivate them, right? So money makes no difference. So if you belong in that category, you want to understand what are the triggers that motivate you, what are the things that pushes you. And sometimes with reserved people, they are often better not necessarily running their own company. They're better being either in a partnership with someone who pushes them, because most reserved people look at it this way: if they're doing something for themselves, they don't care. If they're doing something for others, they don't want to let them down, right? So very, very often what happens is that if they have a business partner, or even if they work with clients, right, they're very good at getting stuff done because they don't want to let other people down. But when they feel they're doing things for their own sake, they generally don't. Um, and I think that's one part of it. Now, others are super motivated by money, and for some people, setting a money goal, just they just run like head to a wall to make sure it happens, right? So the whole thing is that for me, money is about understanding yourself as an individual, as a personality, and it's understand the things that actually motivate you, right? Because until you get to that point and understand what that is, you, in most cases you won't be very successful, because what most people do is they follow the social norms, and they're like, oh, I should have a bigger house, and oh, I'll be happy when I have a bigger house, I'll be happy when I have a bigger car, I'll be happy when I have the latest iPhone. And then suddenly they have all of this stuff and they realize that have absolutely zero to do with happiness for them, right? So yeah.
Which brings us back to the I mean, it kind of brings us into the direction of yeah, wealth equals, a lot of people equate wealth to happiness, but then it's like, okay, well, decode what is your happiness, right? And then, which brings us back to one of the first points that you make, that happiness is a choice. Like, tell us a little bit more about that and how that fits into your business model, even.
Yeah. I mean, fundamentally, as a human being, anything you've ever done, anything you've ever experienced, someone else have experienced and been happy for, right? Most of the time, people's like, I'm sad because I have a bad job. Now, there's people that would kill for the job you have, even if it's to you feels like a shitty job. There's people who's like, oh, I can't find the right partner. If I just find the right partner, then I'll be happy. And it's the same thing. There's lots of people who would love to be single and would be super happy if they were single, right? And so literally every single thing in the world that you can choose to be unhappy about as a human being, there is people who are happy about that exact same situation. And because of this, my philosophy is that it's learning to understand where happiness come from. And I mean, happiness formula is very, very straightforward. So happiness is expectation minus reality, it equals how happy you are, right? So again, if your expectation is that when you find a partner they will make your world amazing, if that's your expectation and then it doesn't happen, you're going to be sad, right? If you expect, well, if I get this job, my world will be amazing because I can afford to eat. And if that doesn't happen, then you're sad, right? So the key thing for me, and that's always been pretty prevalent for me, but it's really understanding like what is your expectation to the world, what is your expectation to people around you. The easiest way to get be a very unhappy human being is to have very high expectations, right? So and that's why I say happiness to a large degree is a choice, right? It is up to you what you choose to expect. Like if you're meeting a friend for dinner, like you can have an expectation and say, we meet at 8 o'clock, let's meet at 8. If the other person doesn't show up, I'm going to be unhappy because we promised to meet at 8. Like that is your choice. Like you have that expectation, and therefore if you choose to be unhappy for that, you're basically choosing to be unhappy, right? And that's I mean, it sounds very simple, and fundamentally I believe it is, but I think a lot of people could really benefit from understanding how their expectation tie into their life, and how their choice of happiness. I mean, particularly social media is one of the worst, right? Because you have all these, and nothing against women, but I think it actually hits women a little bit more. But they're constantly seeing all these happy pictures from everyone around them, and their friends getting gifts. Now their friends don't get gift every day, but there's probably someone they know that got a gift every day, and suddenly they're not getting gifts every day, and they're like, oh, why am I not getting gifts, and it's like, wow, I have a partner, why is he not doing romantic things every night? Because every day I see something romantic on my Facebook feed. right?
It
Um,
distorts the reality for sure.
it
Yeah.
distorts reality. And the thing is, like when you look at things like social media, people post the positive stuff 99%
Obviously,
of
yeah.
the time. And the thing is, if you look at other people that way and therefore think they are like the happiest
Happier
people in the whole world,
person, yeah.
right? Like, I mean, I've I've had some friends that'll be like, "Hey, let's take a selfie. Let's make it look like we're having a lot of fun." I'm like, "What? You if you're not having fun, like what's the
Why are
point
you
in
trying to do it?
making
Yeah,
it
it's
look
like a lot of times
like,
actually my favorite days are the ones where I don't even have my phone. Like I'm on a boat, the phone is in my bag. I'm like having a time of my life. I don't even have time to think about. But yeah, I like your point where it's just that happiness is a choice. It is largely to do with your expectations and also your triggers. You know, a lot of times when you are actually going through triggers, it's emotion, like it's the emotional management at the end of the day. Like how are you able to manage your emotions? And that is part of wealth as well. It's like the ability to manage, you know, how you experience your day, which is your mindset, which we talked about earlier too. Things that are easy to change, that's internal. It's not an external validation. So as
but I think also emotions is also a great piece of it, right? Now, most people don't believe they can control emotions, but they can, right? So, I mean, one of the great questions to always ask people is, if someone does something to you, if that exact same thing had happened in a church, would you have reacted the same, right? Like, and the whole point is, yes, people would. People often react emotionally the way they react based on the circumstances of where they are, and that in itself is proof of they can control themselves, right? So if someone says something to you that makes you upset, again, if that happened someday you're out in a bar, or if that happens in your home, or if it happens in a church, or if it happened in different location, your reaction will generally be different, right? And that is a very great sort of focus of, yeah, understanding like you can control your emotions. And the first thing is understanding you can control your emotions. And the second thing is then like what I've worked a lot with in my life is understanding the difference between um, intent and output, right? Like a lot of the time people's like, oh, this person did this to me. I'm like, no, they did that because they were trying to achieve something totally different. You feel they did it against you, but really they did something for a different, totally different purpose. They didn't understand that that was going to negative you come back to you, right? And I think that's also like really looking at people around you, and learning to look at not just what happened to me, but look at what was the individual trying to do, right? And I think that that's also something that those three aspects. So expectation versus reality, understand you can control your emotions, and then particularly when dealing with other human beings, is looking at sort of the intent behind people's action rather than what actually happens, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. I think that's like a little that's the little like personal development portion of this. Kind of going back to management. A lot of entrepreneurs are, when they're becoming entrepreneurs, part of the reason is because they're creative and they're visionary. And the challenge with creative visionaries when managing a team is that they constantly change direction and they keep getting new inspirations. So how do you see that? Because a lot of times, you know, the team would complain that, you know, you set out this type of direction to creative entrepreneurs, but then halfway through this plan, all these new things come in. How do we manage our time when the boss or the CEO keeps changing the information? So tell us a little bit about that process.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so fundamentally, every personality type have certain strengths and weaknesses, right? And again, the key thing is getting to know yourself so you can utilize your strength and weakness the best possible way, right? So if you're super creative, most super creative people are not very good at getting stuff done themselves. Or they're maybe very good at doing the first 10 or 20%, but they very quickly run out of steam, and they're often not very good at, bringing things to the end. Um, well, a couple of strategies that I have used when working with very creative people. So first of all, one of them is whenever you get a new idea, always write it down and look at it 7 days or look at it a week later, right? Because exactly what you said is typically a problem. And the problem is the idea that a creative person get right now today is the best idea in the whole world ever, right? Now, when they look at that idea a week later, sometimes it's still a great idea, and sometimes they have already had five new ideas that were significantly better, right? So, one of the things I've found work well with creative people, first of all, you need to understand you can't constantly change direction with a team and have them be effective, right? So that's key to understand. So the thing is, you want to set a direction, right? And you want to set a clear direction to your staff. And typically very creative people are very, very good at creating like a vision for their people, and they're very good at creating a vision for the company, and stuff people really buy into, right? But then when you've created the vision, then you need to take it in slower steps, right? So if you get new ideas, write them down, take a little bit of time, and so on and so forth. But the big benefit most creative people have is they're very good at delegating, because they're not naturally good at just doing things and executing themselves so much. So they are typically quite good at actually handing over responsibility to other people, which is great because that often means they have time to think all those visionary thoughts. But again, it's about putting them together, it's putting them down, making sure you keep them. And I mean, I know from myself, when I have 100 ideas, when I write them down and I review them a week or two later, there's still three or four that might be good. And that's good to go with, right? But you need to put some kind of boundaries on yourself. Don't come in every morning with seven new ideas and seven new directions and so on. That is not healthy for a team.
And I also find that sometimes, if you are a huge idea generator, if the idea is strong enough, it'll keep coming back the same ones, and you're looking through your journals or you're looking through your notebook, and you're like, wow, like this one idea keeps circulating every week or every few days, and
Yeah.
it also is a nice way forward. Um, in terms of boundaries with staff as well, I find that a lot of creative people or even visionaries or people who are impact driven, which a lot of you are watching this because you're impact driven and because you want to make money doing what you love. A lot of times, everyone who buys in also wants to do that with you because they also believe in that vision. How do you set the boundaries in terms of time and like making sure that people don't overwork and burnout and organization of time?
Again, people are very different, right? So, and I think there's one of the key things about management is that um, a lot of people think management is treating everyone the same, and in my opinion, management is the total opposite. Management is about treating people in a way that matches their personality, right? Some people some people want to work a lot, some people want to put a lot of hours in and do amazing stuff. And if you physically force them not to, you're actually hindering them doing what they want to do, right? So I think you have the other situation where you have people that, and that's often creative people that, again, they're great, they have a lot of value, but they need their space. If they work 12-hour days, they're going to run out of steam in no time. And they're losing their creativity, they're losing their edge, right? So again, it's very much about understanding where is people in their life. Because again, if you're hiring someone brand new out of college and they're just looking to suck in knowledge and learn and do things, like, most of those people are more comfortable working quite a bit. And I'm always keen on making sure that, like, I don't have a rule saying, you work 40 hours and 1 minute and I'll punish you. Like, that's not how the world works, and that's not how people work, right? So for me, it's much more about working with individuals, understanding like what are they trying to achieve as an individual. Because I have people who do one job with me and then they might be a musician in their free time. Now, being a musician is also work. Like, if they go and play, 5 gigs a week or something, that is in principle also work. Now, if they do that and it fits their life and they can manage that, great. If they can manage it and they only work at half capacity because they're so tired or whatever, then I need to have a serious conversation with them. But again, this is the point where everyone is different, right? And I like fundamentally, I much more spend my time looking at what is people doing with their life, because if you're working and that means you're not spending any time with your kids, that's an issue for me, right? If you are single, you go home and watch TV every day, and instead of watching 4 hours of TV, you only watch 2 hours of TV, that would not be as big as an issue for me, right? So I think it also depends a lot on where people are in their life, the personality, and it's really about understanding each individual, right? Like I had a job early on in Xerox where literally my boss walked up to me in like November 28th and like, oh, you haven't taken any holiday this year, so I'll see you again in January. And I literally had like over a month where I just had to go and do nothing, and I freaking hated that. Uh, no, but it wasn't the point that it's not about the holiday per se, but it was more the fact that I didn't have a choice in the matter, right? And it was like,
Right. It was more like a directive.
right, but and again, like I get it, but the whole point is where I was in my life at that time.
Yeah.
Like my focus wasn't like holidays, and like when I was younger, like I'll travel to a foreign country at least once a month, right? So it wasn't that I didn't travel, I didn't experience things, but it was just I generally didn't spend a lot of my holidays, right? And obviously I know there's Americans here and they don't get so many holidays and all that good stuff, but at least in Europe, like you tend to get a fair chunk of these holiday things, and then uh, some people they love it, they would love to have twice as many, and that's great. And for some people, it makes no sense. So again, totally depend on the person, what the person is trying to do, and so on and so forth.
Makes a lot of sense. I know that a lot of the ways that we track our team like individual goals on a tracker, so that we are constantly knowing, what are they actually aligned to, what are they actually value, and finding different reward systems, or even just being aware and being supportive of their personal goals as well. As it makes a huge difference to create the bond and the strength of that. um, Now moving on to revenue and scaling and being able to utilize some of these methods within the team, but also really to grow your business at such a speed and breadth that you have. What do you think are some of the most important points in terms of lead generation, or in terms of follow through? Like, what are some of the things that you want to share with us about that?
Yeah, I think fundamentally, that like the key aspect generally is that you want to make sure that again you have a scalable business model. So the key things people make mistakes is they don't have a scalable business model that's simple and straightforward. They don't charge enough. So a lot of time when people start out doing things themselves, they are they're basically building like a freelance job, right? So they don't think about, well, if I have to pay someone else to do this work and I still have to make money, how much do I charge? They only think of it from their own perspective. So making sure you actually charge enough money to hire people to do the work and still have a healthy profit is important, right? So I'd say that's probably the two aspects that I see as the biggest limiting factor, if you will.
Got it. And another aspect that we talked about earlier on as we were getting on this call together is the point about networking. So you do business and you create your business a little differently than a lot of the digital marketers in our network or in our group of friends. And tell me, like, why you chose to do it that way, and how much more effective is it, or what allowed you to choose to do it that way, and how have you been doing it so sustainably?
No. Yeah. So again, like the key thing is still you need to understand yourself well, right? You need to understand your strength. You need to understand your weakness. You need to get what are you very good at, right? I am absolutely pretty horrific at marketing and all that kind of stuff. And I learned very early on, like even when I started my coaching, like I learned that the best way for me to get clients was just talk to people, help a lot of people, and through that, like through word of mouth, I ended up getting a ton of clients. Um, there's a lot to be said. Like you can do great things with like marketing automations and content creation and all this good stuff, but it works best if it's you. And what I mean with that is, I like 5 years ago, I tried to write 1,000 word blog post, and it took me like 3 months. Right? I'm not a writer by any stretch of imagination, and if I try and do that, it generally won't be great. Right? The key thing for me, and what I always look at when you're starting up a business, right? The first thing you need to get is you need to get clients, or you need to get customers, or the like. And at least for me, I built all of my business initially up through networking and through getting to know people and so on, right? Because I think it's the most effective way to actually sell things when you're early on in your journey, right? If you're a web designer, right? If you have not built a professional website before, or you've been playing around with it, but you haven't done, you don't have a ton of case studies and all that stuff. Again, the best way to do it is go out in the world and find people who actually need a website, and you know, uh, yeah, do it for them, either at a low cost or whatever, and make sure you get some testimonials and make sure you get some good feedback and so on and so forth, right? But that's how I build my businesses, and I've done a lot of conferences. I've always done a lot of networking, and if you are in business, if you're in management, if you're in any of that stuff, networking is by far the one thing that will make the biggest difference for you, right?
Let's go into that. Let's dive into that just a little bit more because I feel like that's it's easy to say the word networking, but when you're talking about networking, do you have a specific couple of steps that you're always taking? For example, you meet the person, you kind of find out who they are, what they're working on, and then see if there's like a match. Do you do like another conversation? Do you do like follow ups? Is it like a long is it some of them are kind of like ready, and then do you follow up long term? Like, do you have a way to manage that, or how does that work for you?
Yeah, my philosophy is very clear. I don't try to sell anything. So the core philosophy for me behind networking is ability to help people with things they're struggling with. So very simple things you can ask people that you meet is, why are you here? And often they'd say, oh, well, I'm at this social media thing because my social media suck. I've tried to do Facebook ads, and, I don't know how to do it. Now, if you know someone who's good at Facebook ads, you could say, well, actually, I have a friend who's very good at Facebook ads. Maybe, if you have a conversation with him, he can give you some pointers or whatever, right? So for me, it's always about helping people, and it's always about giving value, right? Because if you give value, like, even I've had many clients that never had my coaching, but still recommended me because I probably helped them with something, and they're like, oh, that's a nice guy, right? And then they meet someone else who might need the service that I provide, and they would recommend you even though they never actually tried your service, right? And I think that's the essence of networking. So it's getting out there, it's helping people, and it's really um, yeah, it's really building up a network, because the bigger your network is, the more people you can help. And that's even within your business. I mean, I've lots of people who come to me, and it doesn't suit what I'm providing or whatever, but I always know someone else that can help, right? I'm like, so you're not, maybe not the right client for what we're doing because you don't fit into our process, but I know someone else who will probably be a good fit for you, right? um and that way, again, I mean, I've had so much good feedback from people who've never been clients, just because, again, most businesses, they just take any client they can get, like anyone that have money, like, give me, right? Whereas if you're actually honest and say, hey, dude, you don't fit my framework, again, people respect that a lot, right? So
I think that's like one of the most important key points that we've been making throughout this entire summit and this entire sort of retreat is that the more people you help, the more you're able to kind of be in this flow of like helping each other, people bringing people, and this is one of the ways in which synchronicity happens because it is one of the ways where you spread that good energy around that not to do it for the purpose of having people help you back, but in the most genuine form, it has side effect. So so a lot of people talk about, one of our other speakers talked about, how to scale that helpfulness through content. And so it really is about, if you just have that framework of helping people and just coming from a place of helpfulness, people can feel that and people remember that. All right. So as we're going into the final parts of our conversation, how do you balance revenue generation activity, cash flow, and team management from a day to day perspective? Because I know you're super organized and you have to be if you're managing that many people and that many activities in your year. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a few aspects, right? So I would say, first of all, most people don't know their numbers, right? So most people kind of look at their bank account occasionally, and if there's money in there, they're happy, and if there's not a lot of money, they're kind of sad. And again, most of the time it's because they don't understand their numbers. They don't have a clear framework for the business, and they don't really have like um, they don't have a good way of estimating things, right? And for me, like in every business, you need to understand what generally your goal of profit margin is. Like you need to have a clear expectation of, you know, am I looking to get 20%, 30%, 50%? What am I expecting from this business? You need to have all your numbers so you can actually see, how much am I spending on staff? How much am I spending for filling services? How much am I, what are the expenses? And I think the first step is just understanding those numbers, because if you have those numbers, a lot of the planning and so on becomes so much easier, right? Because you can sit down, you can make some decisions, and you can say, okay, we're trying to grow. I can see that if we get more clients, I need to hire more staff. Now I need to hire that staff ahead of time so we can train them and make sure they're good, right? Now the problem is most people make those decisions without understanding their cash situation and without understanding their profits and so on. And the problem is, if you're making choices based on the emotions instead of actually by understanding the numbers, then sometimes those choices are going to be detrimental to your business, right? So for me, the first aspect and the simple aspect is just understanding your numbers. And honestly, in most businesses, it's not that complex, right? I think some of the most complex business you can run, if you're running like e-commerce where you have to buy a lot of inventory up front and so on, that's probably some of the most complex scenarios. But most service businesses and so on, right? The scenarios are generally not that complex, and it's not like if you have a half decent setup for looking at your cash, looking at your profits, looking at the revenue, your expenses, and so on, and understanding where that goes. Like a lot of people, I'm like, well, how much money do you make? And they're like, oh, well, I make 20 grand a month. And I'm like, great. How much money do you put in your bank account every month? Right? They're like, oh, well, I spent some money, but they don't know. And again, it's easy to build up so many different costs, like particularly looking at like software and stuff. I mean, the amount of clients I've worked with that literally spending thousands of dollars in all sorts of software that they never actually use, right? So for me, the essence and sort of the starting point here is know your numbers and have goals, have expectations, right? There's a good book called Profit First that
Yeah,
is
love
somewhat
that
relevant
one.
to many business models, but they have a decent framework. I don't necessarily believe you need to follow that framework, but you need to have some kind of framework. You have to have some kind of goals, some kind of expectations, right? Like if you have a business that's making, 100K in revenue, what is your expectation in terms of profit, right? Are you going to be able to put 10K, 20K, 30K, 50K in your pocket? Like you need to have expectation for that. And you need to make sure that when you break those expectations, if you go and hire additional staff, etc., that you know why you're doing it and you're making it as a conscious choice. You know what that does to your balance, right?
Yeah. So on a day-to-day basis, how do you translate it? Are you looking at your numbers day to day? Who are you speaking to day to day in terms of your team, and what does your day look like?
Yeah. So on sort of a daily basis, right? I don't look at numbers per day. Like I typically review my numbers monthly. Again, if you are running e-commerce business where where your cash flow is very much up and down, and you have some big chunks, then it can sometimes you really need to look at cash flow specifically. In most businesses, you can just look at your sort of your P&L overview, right? And you can see, what's the money coming in, what's the money going out, and you look at that on a monthly basis, and you're relatively good, particularly in like service business and the likes. Um, and very often that's enough. Like that's enough to review it. It's enough to make decisions. It's enough to, if you have managers in your business, it's enough to sit down and have those conversations with them and saying, we need to cut 10% cost because we're spending too much money for filling right now. And what's the best place to cut? Is the softwares we could cut? Should we cut people? Should we cut, how can we be more effective or whatever, right? So that's typically how I do. Generally, my day to day again looks probably very different than most people. So I have a rule: I never build more than one business at a time that I need to invest significant effort into. Right. So I wouldn't start two business at the same time. I start one at a time, and when that business runs with me a couple hours a week, then I'm comfortable starting another business. Right. So my outsourcing business, for example, that's where majority of our labor force is right now. And I had probably spent somewhere between 2 and 4 hours a week on that business, right? And because I have the team in place to do everything, right? So I'm much more like a coach, and I'm much more just supporting the managers and so on, and making sure they have what they need to work on to move forward. Um, and for I'm a coaching business, obviously my hours because I'm the coach. But we also have, like, I have a marketing person who basically help. Like we have lots of courses and cool things like that. So I have people who basically support with that and so on, right?
Awesome. Great. Yeah. I mean, there's so many more questions we could go on and on about, like, what kind of hierarchy, and to set up and all that. And I'm sure, again, it depends on, what your goals of your business are, and also like the strength and what kind of talent you're looking for to.
I think, I mean, that one doesn't need to be very complex. Generally, my experience, if you look at most companies in the world, they're all structured the same way, and they're generally all structured the same way for a reason, right? It works, and I think a very sort of typical setup with, you have sort of four key departments. So you have sales, marketing, operations, and finance. And obviously, early on, you probably sit on all those hats, right? But effectively, when you start hiring people and start moving people into those kind of roles, then at some point, you have someone who manages operations, you have someone who's responsible for getting your finance together. And in some business, that's more like a bookkeeper. And in some business, that's more like a manager that makes a lot of financial decisions and so on. So again, depending on the business, right? The same sales and marketing, like some business need a ton of sales and marketing. Some people don't need very much. And some companies, it's literally the same department. So again, it depends a lot on the business, but generally those four, like sales, marketing, operations, and finance, you have some of the sort of more techie companies that have sort of a technology department or a CTO type role. And that can make, like, if you're running a SaaS business or something, that can potentially make a lot of sense. But yeah, that's sort of very standard setup in the corporate world. And as a small entrepreneur, my experience is that is relatively good to try and somewhat mirror, right?
Awesome. So if you had to summarize your strength in like a sentence, what would that be? And if people were like, "Oh gosh, like I just really want some of that juice that Mads has," like how would you describe that? Like what do you inspire out of people, or how would you describe that, what you share as a human?
So I think that the key skill set that I've learned and I've developed into is I'm very, very good at putting the right people together to run successful companies. All right. So I'm very good at hiring people, and that is one of the core skill sets for any business owner, right? If you hire the right people, your life is so much easier, right? So that's, I would say, that's in one sentence. That's my key strength, is really putting together amazing people to achieve great results.
Amazing. Okay, cool. So One of the little parts of this last bit of this presentation and this segment is actually doing a little meditation that allows everyone else to feel that core strength that you have as well. Would you be open to doing that? I know we're going a little bit over time.